The coffee maker in the 38th floor break room had been broken for 6 days, which meant I'd been making the 14-minute round trip to the cafe on King Street every morning before 7, which meant I knew, with absolute certainty, that the vanilla latte waiting on my desk, when I arrived on a Tuesday in early March, had not come from me. I set down my bag slowly, looked at the cup, looked at the sticky note folded underneath it, written in handwriting I didn't recognize. Oat milk, 2 pumps vanilla, no foam. You order the same thing every day. I didn't know anyone whose name started with A. Not in this building. I worked for Callaway & Vance, a mid-size commercial real estate firm headquartered in downtown Toronto, and my desk sat directly outside the corner office of Elliot Marsh, senior partner, the kind of man who made other men straighten their posture when he walked into a room, the kind of man whose presence rearranged the air around him before he said a single word. I had worked for him for 2 years and 3 months. I knew his calendar down to the 15-minute buffer he kept before every major client meeting. I knew he took his coffee black, that he read the Globe and Mail in print because he thought screens before 9 a.m. gave him headaches, that he kept a photograph in his desk drawer he never displayed, but sometimes looked at when he thought no one was watching. What I didn't know was who had been watching me order my latte. I left the cup where it was. By 8:15, Elliot had arrived. He didn't come through the main entrance the way most partners did. He used the side stairwell, the one that opened directly onto our floor, and I always heard the door before I saw him. A specific kind of controlled sound, like everything in his life operated at exactly the volume he'd decided was appropriate. He stopped at my desk, looked at the cup. "That's not from the cafe downstairs," he said. Not a question. No, someone left it. A pause, the kind that had weight in it. Who? I don't know. There was a note, just an initial. He looked at me then, in the way he sometimes did when I'd said something that required him to reassess whatever calculation he'd been running. His eyes were this particular shade of dark gray that I'd spent a long time pretending I hadn't memorized. "Throw it out," he said, and walked into his office. I didn't throw it out. The coffee was exactly right and I hadn't slept well, and I told myself those were the only reasons I kept it. The morning went the way mornings usually did. Calls to return, contracts to flag, a scheduling conflict with the Henderson acquisition that I resolved before Elliot noticed it existed, which was the whole point. His assistant before me had lasted 4 months. The one before that, 7. I'd made it past 2 years by becoming fluent in a language no one had explicitly taught me. The language of what he needed before he knew he needed it, of staying visible enough to be useful and quiet enough to be trusted. His voice came through the intercom just before 10. "The Whitmore file. Where are we on the environmental assessment?" "On your desk, left side, flagged in blue." I highlighted the section about soil contamination disclosure because it conflicts with the timeline Whitmore's team proposed. Silence. Then, "You caught that. That's what you pay me for, Mr. Marsh." Another silence. "Come in." I took my notepad and the Whitmore folder and went in. His office faced south, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district, the lake a gray-blue stripe in the distance. He was standing at the window when I entered, hands in his pockets, jacket still on despite the hour. He wore charcoal and navy in rotation, always well-cut, never flashy. The kind of deliberate understatement that came from knowing exactly how much space you already occupied. "The contamination clause," he said without turning around. "Walk me through your thinking." I recognized the test. He did this sometimes, not to catch me out but to understand how I arrived at conclusions. I'd learned to defend my position clearly. Whitmore's timeline has the preliminary assessment completed by April 15th, I said, but the provincial disclosure requirements for any site with a prior industrial use, and this site had a dry cleaning operation through 2009, require a Phase 2 assessment before that window closes. Their lawyers have drafted the agreement as though the Phase 1 is sufficient. It isn't. If we proceed on their terms and the contamination comes up post-closing, we're exposed. He turned. His expression didn't give much away, but something in the set of his jaw shifted. "Revise the disclosure language. I want it on Whitmore's counsel's desk by end of day. Draft is already in the folder, tabbed in green." Something crossed his face then. Not quite a smile. Something more contained, more private. "Efficient as always," he said. "That'll be all." I turned to leave. His voice stopped me at the door. The coffee this morning. The words were careful. Too careful. Did you recognize the handwriting? No. And the initial A. Anyone come to mind? No one who would know my order. He nodded once, slowly. Keep me informed if it happens again. It happened again on Thursday. This time the coffee was already on my desk when I arrived at 6:50, which meant whoever had left it had access to the building before 7. The note was different. I'll be in the city until Sunday. I'd like to meet properly. Archer. I sat with the name for a moment, turning it over. I worked in commercial real estate. Our client list was long and mostly corporate, the kind of names that showed up in business filings rather than conversation. Archer wasn't a name I placed immediately, but the precision of the gesture, knowing my building, my floor, my schedule, my coffee order, didn't feel like coincidence. I was still thinking about it when Elliot arrived. He saw the cup immediately. His gaze moved from it to me to the note I was holding, and something in his expression tightened in a way I'd learned to read as controlled displeasure. Again, he said, his name is Archer. The controlled displeasure became something else, harder, more careful. Show me. I handed him the note. He read it, set it down. Go back to your desk, he said. I'll be right out. He came out 4 minutes later, which I clocked because in 2 years I had learned that everything about Elliot Marsh could be clocked if you paid attention. He handed me a file. Run a search on a company called Archer Capital, private equity, Vancouver-based. I want a full profile, corporate structure, principals, any Toronto connections. Have it to me by noon. Of course. I paused. Is there something I should know about them? His jaw tightened. Not yet. I did the search. Archer Capital was legitimate on the surface, mid-size private equity firm, mostly real estate holdings, founded 11 years ago by a man named Sebastian Archer, 41, Vancouver-born, educated at UBC and the London School of Economics. Clean record, significant assets, and a history of attempting to acquire properties that overlapped, not coincidentally, with several deals our firm had managed over the past 3 years. I brought the profile to Elliot at 11:40. He read it in silence. Then he read it again. Archer has been in Toronto for 6 months, I said. He's been at several of the same industry events our firm attended. The Pemberton Development Dinner in November, the Urban Land Institute panel in January. You were at those events, Elliot said. Not a question. I attended as your representative when you were in Vancouver for the Holt closing, so he's been watching you for at least 4 months. The number settled in my stomach. 4 months. I thought about the coffee, the precision of it, the note signed with nothing but an initial, the patient build of it. Call your friend from legal, Elliot said. The one you have lunch with on Fridays. Margot? Don't go alone anywhere this week. I don't care where. Don't take cars you didn't book. Don't give this man any information if he contacts you directly. He paused. I'm assigning Derek to this floor for the rest of the week. Derek was our head of building security. He was 6'3" and had the quiet, contained energy of someone who had worked in a more serious field before this one. That's not necessary, I said. It is necessary. Mr. Marsh, Elise. My name in his voice, just like that, was a different kind of sound. I'd never heard him use it before. Not once in 2 years. Someone has been watching you for 4 months and just told you about it. That is not a normal situation. Please let me handle this. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. I went back to my desk. The coffee sat there, half drunk, suddenly less comforting than it had been. My phone buzzed at 5:48 p.m., unknown number. Text. I hope the coffees were a welcome surprise. I've been wanting to introduce myself for some time. I think we have a lot to offer each other. S.A. I stared at the message. Sebastian Archer. 4 months of watching, the care of it, the coffee order memorized, the handwriting chosen to seem personal rather than threatening, the approach calibrated to feel like courtship rather than surveillance. My phone rang. Elliot's private line. He'd given it to me 6 months ago, said it was for emergencies. Did he contact you? Text. Just now. He signed it with his initials. Forward it to me. Don't respond. Don't delete it. A pause. Elise, lock your building's front door properly tonight. Check your peephole. I'm having Derek drive by your street. My building has a concierge. Good. Tell them to log any visitors. This feels like a lot. It's appropriate. Another pause, longer. I'm sorry. I know this is unsettling, but I need you to take this seriously. I did take it seriously. It was harder to take seriously the way his voice had changed when he said he was sorry. Not softer, exactly, but stripped of the professional distance he wore the way he wore his jacket. Always on, always fitted, never loosened. I forwarded the message. Then I called the concierge. That night I sat in my apartment in Little Portugal. 3rd floor walk-up, older building. The kind with radiators that clang in February and a landlord who answers texts eventually. And thought about Sebastian Archer watching me from across a conference room in November while I shook hands with developers I'd met in Elliot's place. My phone buzzed again. I'll send a car on Saturday. Dinner at Alo, just the two of us. No obligations, just conversation. I think you'll find I'm worth your time. I didn't respond. He picked up on the second ring. No greeting. He wants to take me to dinner Saturday, I said. Alo, silence. Then, he's escalating. Faster than I expected. What does he actually want, Elliot? I used his first name without deciding to. It had just come out. He didn't correct me. He wants information about our operations, he said. Specifically about a deal we're finalizing, the Lakeshore East development. I have reason to believe Archer Capital is positioned to benefit significantly if the deal falls through, or if our client's interest in the environmental report leaks before the agreement is executed. It landed slowly, then all at once. He thinks he can get it through me. He thinks you're undervalued, loyal but potentially resentful, that you have access and might be persuaded to use it. That's a very specific read of me. He's been watching you for 4 months. Elliot's voice was flat. He's made assessments. And you? How long have you been watching him watch me? A silence that felt different from his usual ones, fuller. Since January, he said. He was at the Urban Land Institute panel. He asked 3 different people about you. Too many questions, too specific. January. 3 months ago. He'd known about this for 3 months and said nothing. You've been tracking him. I've been protecting you. There's a distinction. That sounds like something a person says when they've decided the distinction matters more to them than it will to the other person. He was quiet for a moment. That's fair. I sat with that, with him saying that's fair in a voice that contained something almost rueful, something I didn't have a word for. What do you want me to do? I asked. Nothing yet. I need to think. Okay, Elises. My name again. I know this is a lot to put on you. It's fine, I said, and meant something more complicated than fine. He called the next morning before I'd left my apartment. Come up to the 22nd floor when you arrive. Private conference room, not my office. The 22nd floor conference room was for sensitive meetings. Soundproofed. No glass panels. I'd been in it exactly twice, both times, to deliver documents. He was already there when I arrived. Jacket on, standing at the far end of the table. A folder open in front of him, photographs spread across the surface. Sit down, he said. Please. I sat. He stayed standing. Sebastian Archer's family has been in Pacific shipping for 30 years, he said. His father built the business. Archer restructured it about a decade ago, moved into real estate, presented it all as a clean transition into legitimate holdings. He paused. Some of it is clean, some of it isn't. The shipping division has been used to facilitate the movement of products that fall outside what you'd put in a customs declaration. What kind of products? Restricted medical devices, gray market electronics, cargo that benefits from not being looked at too carefully. His jaw tightened. 3 years ago, my firm was approached by the Archer family, through intermediaries. They wanted access to our network, specifically our relationships with municipal planning contacts and port authority connections. I declined. And then the Lakeshore East deal appeared on our docket, and Archer Capital began positioning itself in our client's competing space. And 6 months ago, Sebastian Archer moved to Toronto and started attending every industry event my firm's representatives attended. He looked at me directly. You, me. He identified you as the most efficient path to what he wants. Access through a trusted internal person, not through me directly. His voice went flat. He's not wrong that it would work. You do have access, but I wouldn't use it. I know that, do you? He held my gaze. Yes, without question. The certainty in it was uncomplicated, not reassuring me, just stating a fact. I looked at the photographs. Archer at industry events. Archer outside a coffee shop on King Street. Archer 2 blocks from my building. I want to know how to end this, I said. I want to move carefully. Any direct confrontation tips him off that we know his approach, and he adjusts. But if he believes he's making progress with you, you want to use me as bait. The word sat between us. He didn't deny it. I want your help to document his approach in a way that can be taken to the RCMP's Commercial Crime Unit. A contact I have there has been looking for a pretext to open a formal investigation into Archer Capital's shipping practices for 2 years. If we can record him making an explicit offer, payment for proprietary information, that gives them what they need. I stared at him. You want me to go to dinner with him. I want you to decide whether you're willing to. It's not an order. It will never be an order. He moved to the seat across from me, sat down, and for a moment he just looked at me, not with the professional assessment I was used to, but with something else, something that looked like the effort of holding something back. If you say no, I find another way. But Elise, he won't stop. People like Archer don't stop when an approach fails. They recalibrate. The only way this ends cleanly is if we force it to end. I thought about it. About 4 months of being watched. About the coffee left on my desk like a claim being staked in careful increments. I have conditions, I said. Something shifted in his expression, almost, not quite, relief. Of course you do, he said. I want to know everything. Not the version you decide is enough for me. Everything. If I'm walking into this, I need the full picture, agreed. And when it's over, when Archer is handled, we talk. About what you almost said to me last night on the phone. About whatever you've been not saying for 2 years. I kept my voice steady. I've been your assistant long enough to know the difference between Elliot Marsh, managing a situation, and Elliot Marsh trying not to say something true. The silence that followed was the longest I'd ever produced in him. Agreed, he said, quieter. The next 3 days were in education. Our office's external security consultant, a woman named Frances, compact and unhurried, who I quickly understood had a past that our industry was a retirement from, taught me how to position myself in a restaurant for optimal coverage, how to wear a small recording device that wouldn't be detectable under a blazer, how to signal if I felt cornered. Derek was assigned as my shadow during commute hours. Elliot reviewed everything with meticulous, barely contained tension, interrupting the security briefings to add contingencies that Frances accepted without expression. On the second night, after everyone else had left, I found him in the conference room reviewing surveillance photographs. You don't have to do this, he said when I appeared in the doorway. I mean it. I will find another way. The other way has more collateral damage. The other way keeps you out of a room with him. I can handle a room, Elliot. I sat across from him. What I can't handle is watching this go on indefinitely. 4 months of being watched without knowing. That ends Saturday. He looked at me for a long moment. His hands were flat on the table. In 2 years I had never seen him look quite like this. Like the calculation was failing him. You drink your coffee with oat milk and exactly 2 pumps of vanilla, he said. Not because you prefer it sweet, but because you read somewhere that vanilla has a mild cortisol-lowering effect, and you've decided this is a reasonable morning optimization. He said it the way someone says a thing they've been storing. You keep 3 pens in your jacket pocket and rotate them by ink level. You reread your own emails once before sending them regardless of urgency. You say that's an interesting approach when someone has suggested something you intend to politely destroy. I didn't move. You come in at 6:50 every morning, not because I require it, but because you prefer the 30 minutes before the floor gets loud. You have a specific way of setting down a folder that means you want me to notice something in it without being told to look. You've worn the same dark green blazer every Friday for 4 months, and I don't know if it's your favorite, or if Fridays just feel like a dark green blazer kind of day. He stopped. The room was very quiet. You've been paying attention, I said. I've been paying attention, he confirmed. More than I should. More than is professionally appropriate. And somewhere in the last 2 years you became the one person in my professional life I actually trust, which is inconvenient and complicated, and not something I planned. I let out a breath. Elliot, which is exactly why you shouldn't do Saturday, because I can't think clearly when it involves you, because the idea of you in a room with Archer, being deliberately charmed by someone who has been calculating his approach to you for months. He stopped again. Jaw tight. It's not rational. I stood up, crossed to his side of the table, And I kissed him, cleanly and without warning, the way you end an argument that's taking too long. He was completely still for 1 second. Then his hand came up and caught mine, not framing my face the way I'd expected but simply holding on, and he kissed me back like he'd been waiting for permission, and now that he had it, he was in absolutely no hurry. When we stepped apart, both breathing a bit more carefully than usual, he kept hold of my hand. "That was not protocol," he said. "No, I'm your employer, I'm aware. There are power dynamics and ethical considerations and, Elliot." I looked at him. "I know all of that, I'm choosing this anyway. Can you let that be enough for now?" He looked at me for a long time. Then, "Saturday. You do it your way. Full security coverage, Francis on comms, Derek within 100 meters. And if at any point something feels wrong, I signal immediately. Promise me, I promise." He didn't let go of my hand for another minute, neither did I. Sebastian Archer sent a car at 7 on Saturday. I wore a dark navy dress, my own, and the small recording device Francis had calibrated was sewn into the inner lining of my clutch. Derek was 3 cars back, Elliot was somewhere. He hadn't told me exactly where, and I'd decided not to ask. The restaurant was on Harborfront, the kind of place that feels like a special occasion even when you've been sent there under duress. Archer stood when I arrived, and I understood immediately what Elliot had meant about calculated approach. He was good-looking in a way that had clearly been considered, effortlessly put together, easy smile, the particular polish of a man who had decided his appearance was an asset and managed it accordingly. "Elise," he said, taking my hand. "I was starting to think you might not come. I almost didn't," I said honestly, taking my seat. "I'm still not entirely sure why I'm here. Curiosity," he said, "and maybe a little bit of the same restlessness I feel. You're wasted doing what you do for Elliot Marsh." I let that land without reacting. That's a strong read from someone who's watched me do it from across a conference room. His smile didn't waver, but something recalibrated behind it. He'd expected a softer opening. "I'm an observant person," he said. "And what I've observed is someone exceptionally capable who has made herself indispensable to a man who treats that as a given." "He pays me well and he's demanding in productive ways," I said. "Most people in my field would consider that a good situation. Most people in your field aren't managing sensitive commercial transactions worth hundreds of millions of dollars, while being credited only as a support function." He leaned forward slightly. "You see everything that crosses his desk, Elise. Every deal, every relationship, every piece of information that gives Callaway and Vance its competitive edge. That's not a support function. That's power without the title." I took a sip of water. Let him continue. "I'll ask you directly, since I think you appreciate directness. I have interests in this city that could benefit significantly from a clearer picture of how Marsh operates. Not trade secrets. Not anything that would constitute a legal problem. Just context, relationships, how decisions get made." He smiled. "I'm willing to compensate generously for that kind of context." "How generously? $80,000 immediately. Another 80, upon delivery of specific information I'll outline." His voice was smooth, practiced. "Think of it as consulting. Unofficial, but entirely your own decision." There it was, packaged in euphemism but unmistakable. "That's a significant offer," I said. "I'd need time to consider it, of course. I'm not going anywhere." He refilled my glass with a confidence that said he thought this had already worked. "I'll be frank, I know Marsh's reputation. I know what it's like to build something and have it complicated by someone else's decisions. He's made choices that affected my family's business significantly, and I've spent 3 years getting to a position where I can respond to that. You'd be helping correct an imbalance. Think of it that way." I thought of it as precisely what it was, someone trying to use me as a lever against a man he couldn't reach directly. "I appreciate the context," I said. "Let me think about it." The rest of the dinner was surface. He was skilled at surface, easy and engaging and careful not to oversell. By the time the bill came, I had everything Francis had said we'd need. In the car back, I kept my face neutral. My hands were shaking slightly, which I hadn't expected, the adrenaline finding its way out now that there was nothing left to perform. My phone rang before I'd reached King and Bathurst. "Are you all right?" Elliot's voice, no question mark in it. "I'm fine." He made the offer explicitly. "I have it all." A breath on his end. Something releasing. "You did perfectly. Tell me that again when this is actually over." "I will." Many times. I almost smiled. My apartment was quiet and too warm the way it always was in March, the radiators finally overcorrecting after months of being stingy. I changed out of the dress and sat at my kitchen table and ate toast and thought about Sebastian Archer's easy confidence, the specific arithmetic of how he'd calculated me. My phone buzzed. "Thank you for tonight. I'll be in touch soon. I think you'll make the right decision." S.A. I forwarded it to Elliot. Then I sat there a bit longer, then I called him. "He texted," I said when he picked up. "I know, I got the forward." A pause. "Francis says the recording is clean, everything we need." "Good." I pulled my knees up to my chest. "Elliot, what did you mean that night in the conference room about your grandmother's influence? You started to say something." A longer pause this time. "She raised me," he said. "My parents divorced when I was 8. My father moved to Calgary, and my mother had problems that made her unavailable in practical ways. My grandmother took me in. She was 71 years old, lived in a townhouse in Hamilton, grew tomatoes in her back garden, and watched the news every night, like it was her civic duty." His voice was quiet but not guarded, the way it got when he was deciding to be honest. "She's the reason I went into law, then into commercial real estate rather than something more financially creative, let's say. She used to say that the line between a deal and a scheme is whether you'd be comfortable explaining it at the dinner table." "Are all your deals dinner table appropriate?" A beat. "Most of them. The ones that aren't, I've walked away from. It's cost me relationships and revenue, and I'm comfortable with that." "That's not nothing." "It's the minimum," he said, "but it's the minimum I've maintained consistently. That has to count for something." I thought about the Archer Capital file, about Elliot knowing for 3 months and choosing not to tell me, not because he wanted to hide it, but because he'd been trying to resolve it before it touched me. "It counts," I said. The RCMP Commercial Crime Unit moved quickly. Once Francis delivered the recording, 2 officers came to our office on a Tuesday, sat in the 22nd floor conference room, with Elliot and his counsel and a very thick file, and left 3 hours later, with a formal complaint and enough to open a full investigation. Elliot handled the intervening week with the kind of focused precision I'd watched him apply to complicated closings. All forward motion, no wasted energy, everything documented. I continued doing my job. We were professional. We were careful. On the Thursday after the investigators left, he appeared at my desk at 4:50, which was unusual. "Do you have plans tonight?" he said. "No, I'd like to take you to dinner. Somewhere quiet. Not alone." A pause. "Just us." I looked at him. At the careful way he was holding himself, the way he did when he was containing something he'd decided to say. "Yes," I said. "Okay." We went to a small Italian place on College Street, the kind with no reservations and a chalkboard menu and tables close enough together that you keep your voice down. He ordered wine without making a production of it. We talked, not about Archer, not about the investigation, not about work, about his grandmother's garden in Hamilton and the summer he'd spent in Edinburgh doing a secondment, and the fact that he'd tried to learn to sail once and found it philosophically unsatisfying. "You like to be in control of the outcome," I said. "Sailing requires negotiating with weather," he said. "I find that unreasonable." I laughed. He looked at me when I laughed and didn't look away. "I owe you an honest conversation," he said. "About what I said in the conference room. You don't owe me anything." "I do." He set down his wine. "I've been managing this, what I feel, as a logistical problem for approximately a year and a half, telling myself that the professional context made it inappropriate and that you deserved someone whose life was less complicated, using every reasonable argument to justify not saying anything. Those are all actually reasonable arguments. They are, and I'm done making them." He looked at me steadily. "You're the most capable person I've worked with. You're the reason the conference room feels different in the morning before anyone else arrives. You're why I take the side stairwell instead of the main elevator, because it means I walk past your desk first, and I can tell by the way you're sitting whether the morning is going to be complicated before I've opened a single email." He paused. "I know that's an unusual thing to admit. It's a very specific thing to admit. I'm a specific person." I looked at him across the table in the small restaurant on College Street. The window fogged slightly at the edges from the cold outside, and thought about 2 years of learning each other's rhythms in a professional context and what it meant that those rhythms had held. "What do you want, Elliot?" I asked. "Not the managed version. The actual answer." "I want to see what this is," he said, "outside of an office context, with full transparency about how complicated my life is and a genuine offer to let you decide whether that complication is something you want." His hand was on the table, not reaching, just present. "I want to be honest with you, all the way, and I want to know if you're willing to start from there." I put my hand over his. "I'm willing," I said. He turned his hand over and held on. The investigation into Archer Capital took 11 months. Sebastian Archer was formally charged in February of the following year. Wire fraud, conspiracy to commit commercial espionage, and related charges connected to the shipping division that went considerably further than anyone had initially expected. His lawyer issued statements. His family's business contracted sharply. He did not, as far as I ever heard, send anyone else coffee. In that time, Elliot and I rebuilt things carefully. I transitioned out of the assistant role. Not immediately, not dramatically, but gradually, taking on an independent consulting arrangement with 3 clients that had nothing to do with Callaway and Vance. I needed my own shape, separate from his. He understood this without me having to say it more than once. We were deliberate about the rest of it. Dinner on weeknights when schedules allowed. Weekends at his place in Rosedale, or mine in Little Portugal, the 2 apartments gradually accumulating evidence of the other person. His copy of the Globe on my kitchen table, my second coffee mug in his cupboard, a key I'd been given on a Tuesday in September for no occasion in particular. There were complications. There always were. A former client of Elliot's who'd had dealings with the Archer family made pointed inquiries about me for a month, the kind that required Derek's involvement and a conversation with Francis. Elliot told me about it immediately, the way he'd promised, and I appreciated the telling, even when the information was unpleasant. "You hate this," he said one night, watching me absorb the latest security update. "I don't hate it," I said. "I hate that it's necessary. That's different. It won't always be this level." "I know." I looked at him. "I chose this with accurate information. Stop waiting for me to reconsider." He exhaled, pulled me close. "You're the most deliberately certain person I've ever met. You're the most reluctantly vulnerable person I've ever met," I said into his shoulder. "We balance out." The last complication resolved itself quietly. The former client relocated their operations to Montreal. The pointed inquiries stopped, and Francis delivered a final security assessment that used the word normalized in a way that made Elliot's shoulders drop by about half an inch. That weekend, he took me to Prince Edward County, a friend's property on the lake, empty in late October, trees gone orange and red, and the kind of cold that requires both of you to share a blanket on the porch if you're going to sit outside at all. Which we did. "I promised you a weekend away," he said. "When this was over, you did. It's over." The lake was flat and silver in the afternoon light. Somewhere across the water a loon called, that particular hollow sound that carries in Ontario fall like nothing else does. "What comes next?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I've been thinking about that. And I think, I want to be direct. I've been indirect for long enough, and it doesn't suit me." I turned to look at him. He was looking at the lake. "I want a future with you," he said. "Not a casual one. Not a complicated situation one. A real one. The kind you plan for." He finally looked at me. "I don't know the right timeline and I'm not issuing ultimatums in either direction. But I want you to know that's where I am, that's what I want." The loon called again. The water held the last of the afternoon light. "That's where I am too," I said. He put his arm around me. I leaned into him. The blanket was warm and the lake was silver, and the trees were burning orange against a sky that had that particular late October quality. Not quite November yet, still holding on to something. We stayed out until the light went. Neither of us suggested going in first. That was where it started, really. Not in the lobby with the flowers, not in the conference room with the revelation, not even in the Italian restaurant on College Street. But on a porch in Prince Edward County in October, with a borrowed blanket and a lake going dark. 2 people who had spent 2 years learning each other in one context, and were only now beginning to understand what they'd actually built. It turned out to be the most important thing I'd ever been deliberately certain about.